Dim the lights, settle in, and prepare yourself for stories that will haunt your dreams and send shivers down your spine. Here at Tombstone Tales, we delve into the darkest corners of the internet, unearthing chilling stories of the supernatural, the unexplained, and the downright terrifying. From shadowy figures lurking in the night to sinister secrets buried deep in forgotten history, each episode is crafted to immerse you in a world of fear and fascination. Hit that subscribe button, join our community of thrill seekers, and embark on a journey where every whisper could be a warning and every shadow a threat. Are you ready to face your fears? Then let the story time begin. It was supposed to be a fresh start. For Sam and his family, the move to Blackwood Forest was a chance to escape the bustling chaos of city life. Their new home was nestled at the edge of a vast, ancient forest, its dense trees stretching as far as the eye could see. Sam, a 16-year-old high school junior, was excited but anxious about fitting into his new school. As the moving trucks unloaded their belongings, Sam caught his first glimpse of the forest from his bedroom window. It was majestic, yet there was an unsettling stillness to it. The first few days passed in a blur of unpacking and settling in. Sam's parents were busy with their new jobs, leaving him to explore the house and its surroundings. The backyard led directly to the forest, with a small, dilapidated fence marking the boundary. Despite the eerie feeling the forest gave him, Sam couldn't help but feel a thrill at the thought of adventure. The town of Blackwood itself was a stark contrast to the forest. It was a small, tight-knit community where everyone seemed to know each other. The local shops and cafes exuded a quaint charm, and the townsfolk were friendly and welcoming. Sam's parents quickly integrated into their new workplace, and even Sam found the locals approachable. On his first day at Blackwood High, Sam was relieved to find that making friends wasn't as hard as he had feared. He quickly bonded with a group of students who shared his love for video games and horror movies. Among them was a girl named Emily, who captured his attention with her quick wit and infectious smile. They clicked instantly, and before long they were inseparable. Emily had lived in Blackwood all her life and knew the town and its surroundings like the back of her hand. She introduced Sam to the local hangouts, the best places to grab a bite, and even the hidden spots in the forest that most people avoided. Her adventurous spirit matched his own, and together they explored the town's many nooks and crannies. Weeks turned into months, and life in Blackwood Forest seemed almost idyllic. Sam and Emily grew closer, spending most of their free time together. Emily's friends quickly became Sam's friends, and he felt a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced in the city. His grades improved, and he even joined the school's soccer team. Sam's parents noticed the positive change in their son and were pleased with the decision to move. The family's new home, a charming Victorian-style house, felt like it had been plucked straight from a storybook. Its wraparound porch, large windows, and the forest backdrop gave it an enchanting quality. Sam's room was on the second floor, with a large window that provided a perfect view of the forest. Despite the peaceful setting, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the forest. It wasn't just the way the trees seemed to close in on themselves, creating an almost impenetrable wall of green. It was the silence, the way the forest seemed to absorb sound. Even on the sunniest days, the forest remained shrouded in shadow. One evening, as Sam and Emily sat on the porch, watching the sunset, Emily shared some of the local legends about the forest. She spoke of old tales passed down through generations, stories of mysterious disappearances, and strange sightings. Sam listened intently, fascinated by the eerie history of his new home. "There's one legend that always gave me chills," Emily said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It's about the drowned girl. They say she was a young girl who drowned in a well deep in the forest many years ago. Her spirit haunts the woods, luring people to their deaths." Sam felt a shiver run down his spine. "Do you believe in it?" Emily shrugged. "I don't know. It's just a story, right? But some of the older folks in town swear they've seen her. They say she appears on rainy nights, looking for her next victim. Sam chuckled nervously, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. "Well, let's hope we don't run into her." Emily smiled, but there was a hint of unease in her eyes. "Yeah, let's hope." Life in Blackwood continued smoothly. Sam and Emily spent their days at school, their afternoons hanging out with friends, and their evenings exploring the town. They discovered a shared love for hiking and often ventured into the forest, careful to stick to the well-worn paths. One evening, a heavy rainstorm battered the house. Sam sat by his bedroom window, lost in thought. The rain drummed a steady rhythm against the glass, creating a soothing yet hypnotic sound. He glanced out at the forest, and his heart skipped a beat. There, amidst the trees, stood a figure. At first, Sam thought it was a trick of the light, but as he squinted, the figure became clearer. It was a girl, her clothes soaked and clinging to her body. Her long, dark hair hung in wet strands over her face. She looked wrong. Her skin was a sickly, pale blue, and her eyes were dark voids. She stared directly at him, unmoving. Sam's breath caught in his throat as the girl began to move. Her limbs jerked unnaturally as she approached the house, her eyes never leaving his. Panic surged through him. He stumbled back from the window, his mind racing. What was that thing? He rushed downstairs to lock the doors, his heart pounding in his chest. He double-checked the locks and bolted the windows, his mind replaying the horrific sight over and over. The storm raged on outside, the wind howling like a tormented spirit. Sam tried to convince himself that it was just his imagination, a trick of the storm and shadows. But deep down, he knew what he had seen was real. Sam barely slept that night, his mind racing with fear and confusion. When he finally drifted off, his dreams were filled with the image of the drowned girl, her dark eyes boring into his soul. He woke up in a cold sweat, the morning light streaming through his window. He tried to shake off the nightmare as he got ready for school. His parents noticed his pale complexion and asked if he was feeling all right. Sam brushed off their concerns, not wanting to worry them with what sounded like a childish ghost story. At school, he struggled to focus on his classes. Emily noticed his distraction and pulled him aside during lunch. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked, concern etched on her face. Sam hesitated, unsure if he should tell her, but he trusted Emily and needed to share his fear with someone. He recounted what he had seen, expecting her to laugh or dismiss it as a hallucination. Instead, her expression grew serious. "Sam, that sounds like the legend of the drowned girl," she said quietly. "It's an old story around here. People say that many years ago, a girl drowned in a well in the forest, and her spirit haunts the woods. They say she lures people to their deaths." A chill ran down Sam's spine. The legend sounded absurd, but he couldn't deny the terror he had felt. Emily squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Don't worry, it's just a story," she said, trying to lighten the mood. "But maybe you should avoid looking out your window at night." Sam nodded, but the unease lingered. Over the next few days, Sam tried to put the incident behind him, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He avoided looking out his window at night and kept the curtains drawn. Emily, ever curious, suggested they do some research on the legend of the drowned girl. They spent their afternoons in the school library, poring over old newspapers, town records, and any books they could find about the history of Blackwood. The librarian, Mrs. Henderson, was intrigued by their quest and offered her assistance. "You're looking into the legend of the drowned girl, aren't you?" she asked one day, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. Sam and Emily nodded eagerly. Mrs. Henderson smiled. "It's a fascinating story. There are many versions of it, but most agree that a young girl named Lily disappeared many years ago. Some say she was murdered, others say she drowned in a well. Her spirit is said to haunt the forest, seeking revenge." She led them to a dusty old book, filled with local folklore and legends. As they read through the pages, they found more details about Lily's tragic story. She had been a kind, beautiful girl, loved by all who knew her. But one stormy night, she vanished without a trace. Her body was never found, but the well in the forest became a place of fear and superstition. Some say her spirit can't rest until she finds peace, Mrs. Henderson said softly. Others believe she lures people to their doom out of anger and sorrow. Sam felt a chill run down his spine. The more they learned about Lily, the more real the legend became. Emily squeezed his hand, sensing his unease. "We'll figure this out, Sam," she said confidently. "We just need to be careful." That evening, Emily was supposed to come over for a study session. Sam had completely forgotten in the chaos of the previous night. As the rain started again, he sat at his desk, trying to focus on his homework. A knock at the door startled him. He glanced at the clock. Emily was early. He rushed downstairs to let her in, but when he opened the door, no one was there. Puzzled, he stepped outside, peering into the dark, rain-soaked night. He called out her name, but there was no response. A sense of dread settled over him. As he turned to go back inside, something caught his eye. A piece of paper was pinned to the door. With trembling hands, he pulled it free and unfolded it. The note was scrawled in messy, wet handwriting, "Come to the well." Sam's blood ran cold. He knew exactly which well the note referred to, the one in the legend. He hesitated for only a moment before grabbing a flashlight and a jacket. He couldn't leave Emily in danger. The forest was eerily silent as Sam made his way through the trees. The rain had lessened to a drizzle, but the ground was muddy and slippery. He followed the path he had seen on his walks with Emily, his heart hammering in his chest. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness, guiding him towards the well. When he reached the clearing, he saw the ancient, crumbling structure. The well was covered in moss, its stones worn and cracked with age. A wooden bucket hung from a frayed rope, swaying gently in the breeze. Sam approached cautiously, shining his light down into the darkness. "Emily?" he called out, his voice echoing down the shaft. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of his own breathing. Then, faintly, he heard it, a voice calling for help. Emily's voice. "Sam, help me." Desperation drove him to lean over the edge, trying to see down the well. But before he could react, a cold, clammy hand shot up and grabbed his wrist. Sam screamed, but the hand was impossibly strong, pulling him down into the darkness. Sam tumbled through the well, hitting the sides as he fell. He landed in a pool of icy water, gasping for breath. The tunnel he found himself in was narrow and claustrophobic, the air thick with dampness. Water dripped from the walls, pooling around his feet. He heard Emily's voice again, louder this time, echoing through the tunnel. Ignoring his fear, he pushed forward, following the sound. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading him deeper into the earth. As he waded through the rising water, he felt the weight of the darkness pressing in on him. Eventually, he reached a chamber where the tunnel opened up. In the dim light of his flashlight, he saw Emily. She was standing at the far end, her back to him. Relief flooded through him. "Emily, thank God, I found you," he called out, rushing towards her. But as she turned, Sam's relief turned to horror. Emily's eyes were black voids, her skin a sickly blue. She opened her mouth, and the voice that came out was not her own. "Welcome, Sam." Sam stumbled back, his mind reeling. The thing that had taken Emily's form stepped forward, its movements jerky and unnatural. The voice continued, a grotesque mockery of Emily's tone. "She's mine now," it said, "and soon you will be too." Sam turned and ran, panic driving him deeper into the tunnel. The water was rising rapidly, now up to his knees. He could hear the creature's footsteps behind him, slow and deliberate. Emily's screams echoed through the tunnel, but he couldn't tell if they were real or a trick of his mind. He ran blindly, the flashlight flickering as the water splashed around him. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, a never-ending labyrinth of darkness and water. His lungs burned, and his legs ached, but he couldn't stop. Not until he was free. As the water reached his waist, Sam felt his strength waning. He could hear the creature behind him, its raspy breaths growing louder. He turned a corner and saw a faint light ahead. Hope surged through him, and he pushed forward with renewed determination. The tunnel opened into another chamber, this one larger and filled with water. The light was coming from a hole in the ceiling, too high to reach. Despair threatened to overwhelm him, but he forced himself to keep moving. He waded through the water, searching for any way out. Suddenly, a hand grabbed his ankle, pulling him under. Sam thrashed and kicked, but the grip was relentless. He broke the surface, gasping for air, only to be pulled down again. He struggled against the creature, but it was too strong. The water filled his lungs, and darkness closed in. As he sank into the depths, the last thing he heard was Emily's voice, calling his name. The town of Blackwood Forest tried to move on from the tragedy. Whispers and rumors about Sam and Emily's fate grew. Some believed they had run away together, while others were convinced they had fallen victim to the forest's sinister legend. Among those who couldn't let go was Jake, one of Sam's closest friends from school. Jake had always been skeptical of the supernatural, but Sam's disappearance shook him to the core. Determined to find answers, he began his own investigation. He retraced Sam and Emily's steps, interviewed townspeople, and spent countless hours researching local legends. One evening, Jake found himself at the library, going through the same dusty books that Sam and Emily had explored. Mrs. Henderson, the librarian, noticed his growing obsession and approached him with a concerned expression. "Jake, I know you want to find out what happened to your friends, but you need to be careful," she warned. "The forest is dangerous, especially at night." Jake nodded, but he was undeterred. "I need to know the truth, Mrs. Henderson. I can't just sit by and do nothing." The librarian sighed, her eyes filled with a mix of worry and understanding. "If you insist on pursuing this, at least take some precautions. The legend of the drowned girl is not something to be taken lightly." Armed with new information and a determination to uncover the truth, Jake prepared for his own journey into the heart of Blackwood Forest. He packed a backpack with supplies, including a flashlight, a first aid kit, and a map of the forest. He also brought along a camera, hoping to capture any evidence he might find. Jake waited for a night when the moon was full, providing enough light to navigate the forest. As he stepped out of his house, a sense of foreboding settled over him. He glanced at his phone, noting the time, midnight. The air was cool and crisp, and the town was eerily quiet. He made his way to the edge of the forest, following the same path that Sam and Emily had taken. The trees loomed overhead, their branches intertwining to create a canopy that blocked out most of the moonlight. Jake's flashlight cast long shadows on the ground, and every rustle of leaves made his heart race. As he ventured deeper into the forest, Jake felt an oppressive silence surround him. The only sounds were his own footsteps and the occasional hoot of an owl. He followed the map carefully, heading towards the clearing where the well was located. When he finally reached the clearing, the sight of the ancient well sent a shiver down his spine. It looked exactly as Sam had described it. Moss-covered stones, a frayed rope, and an air of foreboding. Jake took a deep breath and approached the well, shining his flashlight down into the darkness.
"Sam?
"Emily?" he called out, his voice echoing down the shaft. There was no response, only the sound of dripping water. Jake pulled out his camera and began taking pictures, documenting the scene. As he reviewed the photos, he noticed something strange. A faint, ghostly figure hovering near the well. His heart pounded as he took another look. The figure was clearer this time, a pale, translucent form of a young girl with dark hair and hollow eyes. Jake's hands trembled, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Who are you?" he shouted, hoping for some kind of response. The ghostly figure seemed to flicker and fade, and Jake felt a sudden rush of cold air. He shivered and took a step back, his mind racing. Could this be the spirit of Lily, the drowned girl? Was she trying to communicate with him? Before he could ponder further, the ground beneath him began to tremble. Jake stumbled, dropping his flashlight. The earth around the well cracked and shifted, revealing a hidden entrance to an underground tunnel. A sense of dread filled him, but he knew he couldn't turn back now. Summoning his courage, Jake picked up his flashlight and descended into the darkness. The tunnel was narrow and damp, the air thick with the smell of earth and decay. Water dripped from the ceiling, pooling around Jake's feet. He moved cautiously, his flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning in a maze-like fashion. As he ventured deeper, Jake heard faint whispers echoing through the tunnel. They were indistinct at first, but as he pressed on, they grew louder. It was the sound of a girl crying for help. Emily's voice. His heart ached at the thought of her trapped in this forsaken place. "Emily, can you hear me?" he called out, his voice trembling. The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence. Jake's pulse quickened as he continued forward, the tunnel narrowing even further. He had to crouch to avoid hitting his head on the low ceiling. After what felt like hours, he reached a small chamber. In the dim light, he saw Emily sitting on the ground, her back against the wall. Relief flooded through him, and he rushed to her side. "Emily, thank God I found you," he said, reaching out to touch her shoulder. But as she turned to face him, Jake recoiled in horror. Her eyes were black voids, her skin a sickly blue. She opened her mouth, and the voice that came out was not her own. She said, "Welcome, Jake." The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. This wasn't Emily, it was the drowned girl, using her form to lure him in. Jake stumbled back, his mind racing for a way out. "You won't escape," the creature hissed, rising to its feet. "Just like Sam, you'll join me in the darkness." Jake turned and ran, his heart pounding in his chest. The tunnel seemed to close in around him, the walls narrowing as he tried to flee. He could hear the creature's footsteps behind him, slow and deliberate. He sprinted through the twisting passages, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The water around his feet was rising, making it harder to move. Desperation drove him forward, but the tunnel seemed to stretch on endlessly. Jake's strength was waning, but he refused to give up. He had to find a way out, for Sam, for Emily, and for himself. The whispers grew louder, taunting him with every step. The water was now up to his waist, and he struggled to keep his footing. As he rounded a corner, he saw a faint light ahead. Hope surged through him, and he pushed forward with renewed determination. The tunnel opened into a large chamber, filled with water. The light was coming from a hole in the ceiling, too high to reach. Despair threatened to overwhelm him, but he forced himself to keep moving. He waded through the water, searching for any way out. Suddenly, a hand grabbed his ankle, pulling him under. Jake thrashed and kicked, but the grip was relentless. He broke the surface, gasping for air, only to be pulled down again. He struggled against the creature, but it was too strong. The water filled his lungs, and darkness closed in. As he sank into the depths, the last thing he heard was Emily's voice, calling his name.